Chair, members of the RAC. Yep, some of you may remember last November we talked about, every year I do a public comment report. I pull a ton of data from our FleetNet, which is a process where people can enter complaints and compliments and suggestions and stuff to our staff and everyone else. So I've been doing this since 2016, but ever since 2019, I've been doing it in a specific format where we could do comparisons of previous years. So it worked out well when you guys told me to look at a comparison between 2022 and 2019. So on pages 6 and 7, I have my memo and some more information, but I thought this would probably be a better document. Let's just do all 4 years. It's a lot easier to look through. So as you see and the categories, you can see the ridership. So, I mean, there'll be variations sometimes based on ridership if you're doing rides per, or complaints per 10,000. But in 2019 versus 2022, you can see there was a huge drop in the total number of complaints. And then also too for 2020 and 2021, you see it's basically scaling down since then. And you can attribute some of that obviously to COVID and the ridership numbers dropping and everything else. But I think the numbers that are really relevant here are the valid complaints per 10,000 rides, because there is a FY 2022 ridership was almost about 82% of FY 2019, which was the pre-COVID. So the things you need to look at are basically valid complaints per 10,000 rides, which is a way to quantify those numbers. And you can see that we've dropped from 1.64 valid complaints per 10,000 rides to 0.7% in 2022. And also to the percentage valid. In 2029, we had a little over half of the complaints are valid. And when I say valid, there's various methodologies we use to kind of look at that. We will check with the person individual. We will talk to the bus rider if it's something about driving too fast or driving too fast for conditions or whatever. We also have the ability to actually track bus speeds and everything else and kind of see who's saying what and what the situation is. So you can see that number has dropped to the percentage valid dropped from 52.2% to 39.8%. Over the last 3 years, that percent valid is really very little and stuff too. So, and again, the valid complaints dropped from 350 to 72 from 2019. But we've been seeing a drop again. Obviously, 2022 is was impacted by COVID. 2022 we recovered. That ends September 30th of last year. So that covers October 1st of 2021 to September 30th of 2022. So things are pretty settling down with COVID. Why are we seeing the drop? I'm anticipating Walter's question.
Tell us.
Please. And if I knew that, I could turn lead into gold, I think. It's just a ton.
I realize I'm questioning good information. I mean, we're glad to see this.
Yeah, and thank you.
But I'd ask the same question if it were the other way around for sure. So why not ask why when you've got such a dramatic change in data to the good?
And I wish Leslie was here, because Leslie, I think the same question was asked from her in November when we did it last November, and she said just better driving. And so that's kind of a simple answer, but I can't answer the question. I mean, the categories were fairly consistent. If you look on the reports, like the top categories, like aggressive driving and missing bus stops and things like that, are the same. But I honestly, there's nothing within the report, because like I said, I end up getting about a 23-page report, which I winnow down based on the different types of services and stuff too. I don't have that answer. But I'm happy to see it though. And again, the methodology did not change at all. I use the same exact processes every year in reviewing that information and compiling numbers and percentages.
Well, my thought with your presentation here was, since the number of riders went down and so forth, we got rid of the complainers. which is a horrible thing to say at all, but we didn't, because the percent valid back in 19 was 52%, higher than what it was in 2022.
Right.
So it's not like we got rid of Mary Beth, who rides all the time and writes a complaint all the time. The valids dropped, while, that you're per 10,000.
And honestly, as long as I've been doing this, Chairman, there may be somebody with 30 postings in there. So, I mean, we don't say you get one chance to complain, then you're done. So if your theory holds true, then, if we may have people who find that their life's goal is to just complain and stuff too, about different things and stuff too. It doesn't make up for everything on here, the numbers and everything else, but
I'm certainly glad to see it, and perfectly happy to accept Leslie's answer that we're doing a better job. And we certainly hope that's what it is.
Mr. Chair, I double checked the math and everything. Like I said, I have a cheat sheet because I do it once a year, and I look and I just like, how the heck do I, oh yeah. And then I start, calling numbers. You can pull out specific numbers, specific types of service, specific, like infractions or allegations or complaints in each one of those different categories. So, and then the public comment sheet has more details and stuff in terms of like the top categories. But that doesn't really change over the years, in terms of, well, he was driving too fast, or he missed me. I was trying to not miss me on the road, but missed me at the bus stop and everything else. So
congratulations to whoever and whatever it is. Others, questions, comments for Mark? Yes, ma'am.
I actually have some thoughts about that. Looking from 2019 to 2022, I remember in 2019, they did some route changes because a common complaint is that buses were running late. And that's one of the categories, right? That people were like, the bus is late, the bus. Yeah. I almost wonder if that might have had an effect on it a little bit. I don't know if you remember the changes that they made in 2019. I know that one of the routes I took that commonly ran late, that was changed and that improved. So I wondered if that is something. And the other thing I wonder too, when you talk about missed stops, right? Or maybe a driver driving aggressively, is I actually got to see a man being trained the other day driving the bus. And I was so impressed with the thoroughness that he did in training him as to where the stops were and where he needed to go, that I almost wonder if the training itself has improved also. So as a rider, as a regular rider, those are the things that I have noticed in the past couple of years. So there's a little theory out there as to maybe why there aren't as many complaints, but also kind of like along with what Walter said, the people who have been riding the buses in the past couple of years during COVID are the people who need to ride. It's a necessity for them. And maybe those are people who are less likely to complain. Seriously, and when you have people maybe who work downtown and maybe are part of more of the business crowd, they are more likely to complain. Those of us who are just trying to keep a roof over our head and food on the table and have that necessity, we don't necessarily have time to complain or follow up.
Glad to have a bus ride.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. We're glad to be able to have transportation available to us, and we just kind of accept that sometimes things are going to happen. So anyway, those are some theories that I had thought of when I was looking at that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mary Beth, there may be some validity because part of the planning department's job is not only to maximize our resources, but to look and see what's working in existing routes in terms of timings and stuff too. So that's always a part of the service changes is, do we need to make timing changes and stuff too? So I don't know if it may be a contributing factor. I think I'd be remiss if I said, yeah, because the work by Stephen and the crew, that's why the numbers drop, but I'm sure it has an influence on it and stuff too. So, yeah. And I would, excuse me, Mr. Leslie may be able to touch more on the training has changed or anything else, or if there's, because there's also a possibility of training, having some kind of impact. I think you're right on that. So I think it would probably be collectively training, less people writing, or less people who like to complain writing, and just I think maybe collectively we could do that. But I can't look at those 20-some pages and say, oh, this is why we saw a drop and stuff too. So probably be anecdotally we did it.
Anyone else? Is Leslie with us? One moment. Is Leslie with us? Okay. Jeremy, was that you?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank Mark for pulling that information together. It's useful. We look at this data across a couple different committees, particularly ACHD, and it's always good to be paying attention to the trends. And this is a good trend. So I appreciate you pulling this together in this way. It's very useful.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate that.
Thank you for your work.
Mr. Chair, if anybody on this panel would like a copy, this was not in the packet. So if anybody would like this, I think this was just easier to talk about and just really right there and stuff too. I would be happy to send it out. I'll have Paula send it out to everyone.
Why don't you do that, please?
Can do that. Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this particular topic? Okay, we'll move ahead to the information operations update. And if Leslie's not with us, who is going to do that? Anyone? Stephen, step up to a microphone, sir.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, Stephen Hunt, Chief Development Officer, standing in for Leslie. Didn't have a presentation prepared, but we are here to respond to the memo that's in the packet about the operations update. And maybe just one quick word before we leave well, I know we already left the previous comment or previous item, but there's a marketing phrase that I'm familiar with, which says you shoot at anything that flies and claim anything that falls. So the point being, sometimes you don't know the exact relationship between your effort and the outcome, but we can report on effort and we can report on outcome, and whether or not there's a direct relationship between the two is harder to claim. So just to recap, yeah, I think there certainly have been strong efforts on the operations side, both with Leslie and the work that she's doing with Jeanette and with Greg and Corey to improve safety and training of the operators. They've gone through a lot of turnover in terms of staff and been able to keep things going well. So kudos to them. And then, as Mary Beth pointed out, there was the service change in 19. And I think anytime you have a change, you're going to stir up more comments. And that as you get farther and farther away from that, you can predict that would also likely subside. If we have future changes, like large future changes, I suspect that you may see those types of comments come back. And so there's some cyclicalness to it, but yes. So we've certainly been doing efforts to improve our on-time performance and training, and so we'll claim all of those shots and be happy for the changes that we're seeing.
Thank you.
So as far as the operations update, this is on pages 8 to 10 in your packet. And the highlights that are there, I just wanted to touch on is we're continuing to make progress on the electric bus charging situation. So Proterra has provided us with some additional chargers, and we will yet be receiving, before this is all over, they'll be transferring out the chargers that weren't working with new dual dispensers, which will, in the end, so stuff happened at the beginning. We're doing all this stuff to fix it. At the end, we'll have 18 chargers, which is more than what we had originally contracted with Proterra, and we'll be able to get all of the vehicles in operation. We are currently, I think we said we have 5 that are currently in service, and the remaining, let's see,
Have 7.
7 that are currently in service and 5 that will be put into service when the remaining chargers are installed and have passed their operating tests. So it's been a long road, and we are hopeful that we're nearing the end of that to be able to get all those vehicles in service, which is important because they were intended to replace existing buses, and so as those move out, we'll be able to get new ones in. Rather, as the new ones come in, we'll be able to retire the old ones.
Well, before you leave that topic, Stephen, you may
Yeah.
not know the answer to this. A year ago or 8 months ago, I asked about payment for these buses and the timing of paying for them. And I don't remember the exact answer. There was an agreement that when certain things occurred, we would pay for the buses. Do you know the status of that?
It is my,
That we have 5 that are not usable right now because of the charging situation. Have those been paid for or not, or does anyone know?
should fair, it's my understanding that we're withholding final payment until they are in operation. So those, I'm assuming that we probably have finished payment for those first 7, but the remaining 5, I think we're holding on to completing that payment until those chargers are complete. Is that your understanding as well, Jason?
All right, thank you.
And then the other 2 things on the operations list is the regional Beyond ADA on-demand project. So this is an ongoing effort where we're looking to increase the accessibility of transportation options, essentially taking all of the, when we say on-demand, we're just talking about not fixed route, and whether that be, say, the work that we're doing with Harvest Transit or Metro in Canyon County, or any of the non-fixed route services that we provide, trying to pool all those resources into a single place where people can make a request a ride and then get service based on where they're going, rather than which agency they approach initially, which service provider they approach initially. So that's continuing. There are 4 steps that are outlined in the memo. First being documenting existing conditions, and then developing criteria and performance metrics. Those have been completed. We're working on steps 3 and 4, which is testing assumptions and developing a budget that will help us achieve that plan. And so that is continuing to move forward. Jason, you may have an idea on schedule. I think the idea, I mean, none of this would be starting until 2024. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. It's fall.
All of this year.
I think we have a meeting this week, actually, to talk about next step timeline type stuff too.
And then the last update is just an update on the 2 new routes, or significantly new routes from the last service change, routes 30 and 45. Route 30 is a new route in Meridian, and we knew that we would be having low ridership as we cut new ground here, but the intent was to connect the major centers within the city of Meridian, essentially crossing the east-west, the crossing through downtown Meridian, central part of Meridian, from the western border over to the eastern border, essentially. So serving 10 Mile and downtown, 10 Mile crossing in downtown Meridian and out to the village. Based on the launch of the 9 extension in Eagle during COVID, we set some very low expectations going into this, and you'll see in table 1 in the memo, we weren't expecting much more than 1 boarding an hour initially through the first year of operation, and we are exceeding that, but we are still well off of both the system averages and where we want to be in the end. But that's expected. I mean, it's expected it'll take us some time to get there. And so we were encouraged by the fact that we're above where we said we might be, almost by double, but we'll see how things progress over the summer and into the next fall. One caveat, I guess I would say about the 30 is we did get, Kathleen has reached out to me, who does our past programs, because she's had some contact with the West Ada School District about needing some help getting students to and from school. So there could be some opportunities. So the 30 serves Meridian High School. It also serves, comes close to the middle school, and there's an elementary school along Pine there as well. So there could be some opportunities to leverage the service on 30 with the West Ada School District. We don't have a past program, for example, with any of the high schools in West Ada, as we do in the city of Boise. I have noticed that there appears to be a high school student that rides the bus in the afternoon. Seen him on when I get on and get off. So he gets off at Stonehenge. Just guessing. I haven't talked to him. So I think there's opportunity for that to continue to grow. I would also mention we kicked off the 30 in support of Oktoberfest, which was a community event here in Meridian. We anticipate doing that again this year. So just raising awareness and having people become more familiar with that route, we hope to see it continue to grow, as well as just filling up the apartments and developments that are both here in downtown Meridian, along Pine, and at 10 Mile, we're hoping to continue to open that up. I guess then one more point about the 30 is we had always expected that its utility will become greater the more it connects to services from and to the east, namely Boise. And so we're continuing to look for opportunities to do that. And so that we anticipate would also trigger some additional interest in the 30.
Stephen, if you finish that topic, let me ask a question about it.
Sure.
So you had, I guess these were your projections of 600 in the first quarter on Route 30?
Correct,
And
yeah.
did almost double that. Was the 600 communicated to the city of Meridian when you were marketing this as a possible route?
It was when we shared with them. It was included in the materials with our MOU with the city of Meridian on funding for the Route 30 for FY23.
Okay, well, I have a monthly meeting with the Meridian mayor, and it's next week. I want to point this out to him.
Sure.
I thought he did a really great job when he came to the opening, spoke well of it. I had my questions about how committed he was, public transit or scheduled public transit.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to bring this up to him and make him aware what it's doing.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Hey, yes, ma'am.
Stephen, thank you for bringing that up about the school district, because that's actually a question that I had written down here. I spoke with somebody who rides that bus about the time that school is released around the Meridian High School, and they said it is incredibly congested in that area. And they had noticed the one student also that rode and noted that they had paid. And so I had wondered, because I know with Boise School District, the high schoolers don't have to pay. And I had just kind of wondered the relationship. So I'm really happy to hear this. And hopefully, if something happens, that there's a pass program that we can really spread the word to high schoolers so that that's an option for them. Like if they need to get to school early for 0 hour or have after school activities. I am really happy to hear you say that. So thank you.
If I could add to that, anytime, whenever we launch a route or something like that, we will reach out to as many stakeholders along the route as possible. West Ada School District being one of them when we launched the 30. So we were in conversation with them in the months leading up to see what we could do to get information into the school and whatnot. But and then sometimes these things just take time to kind of plant the seed and get the interest growing. So it's pretty encouraging.
Okay, Stephen, carry on.
And then the Route 45, which was a restructured route that went from CWI to Boise State. It operated on the freeway. We changed that in October to begin operating on Fairview, essentially between Boise State and all the way out to CWI. So that route compared to so this is a restructure of a former route. We were looking to increase its accessibility. So in transit, we're often playing with the trade-off between speed and access. And so on the freeway, you have a lot more speed, but very few, like the only places essentially to board the bus were at CWI and at Boise State. Whereas along Fairview, there were, I forget the number, but there were multiple times more people that could access the bus using the Fairview alignment, but it also roughly doubled the amount of time that it took to get from CWI to Boise State. So a large change to the service, and it's encouraging in my view that with essentially turning over the entire orientation of the route in the first quarter, we were able to continue to have about as many individuals as were in the former 45. I know that there are people that are using to get between places, not just between CWI and Boise State, but also any of the destinations along the route. So like in Meridian, at the Village, Maple Grove, some of those destinations that are a little bit farther to the west from Boise. So it's encouraging to see that continue to grow. And I think that there's, especially so the 45 ran all year, even when Boise State and CWI were out of service. And so I think that there's a lot more opportunity for this to have kind of consistent ridership throughout the year, where the 45 had quite a bit of drop off during the summer months. So again, with this one, we're not to where we want to be, but we're on a growth path. And then finally, that is it.
Any questions for Stephen? Comments? Okay, thank you, Stephen. Are you going to take the next item as well?
Nope,
So I have the PowerPoint. Could you stay up there
I can.
just in case?
Yeah.
I don't have all the. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So the next item.
Next item will be the Canyon County on-demand transit update. We have consistently, ever since this was implemented, asked for a monthly update on how it's doing, what it's doing. The original goal was 10 boardings per hour. We've never gotten there. We are not close. And my memory is correct. The last explanation we got was that until the local agencies provide more money for buses, drivers, routes, or abilities, it's really never going to get there. So this may just be yep, that's still where we are, or it may be something new. So,
Well, let's see.
let's see. You're going to surprise yourself with this, right?
Perhaps. I mean, I put the graphs together, but I know it's coming. But I won't be able to add much additional commentary to this. So I'll kind of roll through. This is an information item on behalf of Leslie. So these are the highlights on February, rides requested. And this is all pretty consistent with what we saw in December, I believe, maybe some slight increases on requested rides. Rides accepted is trending up, and seats unavailable is trending down, which are some big markers, I think. But yeah, that's where we are in February. Stephen, anything to add?
In the memo, it just compares January to the year prior, and as Jason mentioned, the rides request is up about 9%. I think the rides accepted is up about 6%. Boardings per hour, which is that metric that Walter was talking about, has remained static at 3.5 boardings per hour.
So really no real change January to January. Minimal change.
I believe there was some growth in operating hours and miles. So that's how we saw the increase in ridership, but same ride boardings per hour.
And I skipped ahead a little bit, and maybe I'll go back and then we can come back to it. But we also compared February to February here. And so there is some growth in ridership, but perhaps I'll take these in order. Yeah, average wait time from request is 26 minutes. Average ride time is 18, 7 miles on the average trip distance. And walking distance to the stop is about 1/8 of a mile. We are seeing new registrations, 59 new registrations, most of them using the phone app, which is really good for us to know as far as how do we market, how do we educate people, especially with, as we're discussing the Beyond ADA project, because the software being used for on demand is the same that we'll use for a lot of other services as well. So it's good to see these kind of numbers, and 4.8 stars is pretty high.
It's always been good.
Yeah. Pretty solid.
Consistently good.
Month-to-month comparison. Slight downturn in ridership. A little bit more on the hours and the revenue miles. But everything's pretty consistent.
Jason,
Yes.
the point of clarification again between the memo and the presentation, you're seeing on the presentation, this extended a month into February. So comparing January to February, the memo showing January to the year prior.
And this one shows where the memo had January to January. This is February to February of previous year.
And again, to point out, you see some variation month to month. And so January compared to January, we saw some ridership growth. January to February this year, we saw it decline a little bit. But if you looked at February to February, there's growth again. So we try, that's the reason that we look at month to the month in the year prior, is to try and account for any seasonal variations. So just a note.
Yeah, while there's some changes in the numbers, the one that stays consistent is the boardings per hour. We can't seem to be able to budge that. And we've been told it's a matter of dollars, put more into it to get more out of it.
Yeah, and I would just offer, we started this exercise a number of years ago to test the theory that there are more efficient ways of providing the service out there. Fixed route was about 5 boardings an hour before we made this change, and that wasn't enough. And so they said, well, one of the reasons is because we're using old methods of how long have we done fixed route? There must be a better way to provide the service. Can we do it like Lyft or Uber? And so that's essentially the model. And there are some distinct advantages to this model, but one of them does not appear to be increased boardings per hour. The advantages are we're able to go more places, and it changes day to day, so you're not having to go the same route all the time. But it's tough to have that many more boardings per hour.
Do either of you know what BRT's cost for the fixed route was versus what it's costing to run this? I don't know if we've seen that data.
I don't have it off the top of my head, no. That could be something that we could look at, though.
Could we get that in next month's report, please?
Always take notes.
We were running, you said, around 5 boardings per hour on the fixed.
That's what
we were running right under 4 at best so far on the on-demand. Are we spending twice the money to do less, or half the money and only doing less? I mean, if it came from your comment
Yeah.
that the fixed route at 5 wasn't efficient. Yes, I have to know the money to know whether or not this is not what we expected, but it's more efficient or not.
I can say that the budget for the on-demand was based off of the old fixed route. So I would expect them to track, I mean, costs have changed over that time, but in terms of like the hours of service and it's not like we have different drivers or different vehicles. So most of the cost structure is the same as under fixed route, but we can look at that.
If you would, or ask Leslie to bring it to us if she presents this next month, so we can get a little feel for that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
can I ask Stephen a question? Do you know if we're still being limited on the number of rides we can pick up from the healthcare facilities? I know we could have had more riders, except they would only allow so many people on the buses at a time.
I'm not aware of that in the moment. I don't know.
I've heard that, but I don't have any idea what the answer to the question is. We were told that at some point.
Being from Southwest District Health, I can check into that for you. I doubt you have any restrictions on it at this point. But I can check with some of our people.
Okay, any questions? For either Jason or,
Mr. Chair,
yes, ma'am.
and I can only check on that through Southwest District Health for the on-demand service. You'd have to check with Central for your ridership in Boise, but it doesn't seem to. Which are you referring to, Paula?
We don't have on-demand in Ada County.
So you're just asking for the on-demand.
Yep.
Okay.
Anyone else with anything? Stephen, one last thing. We're looking at on-demand in Eagle.
That's correct.
Is it planned to be a duplicate of what we're doing in Canyon County in the places where it can be compared? Is it going to be the same type of system, same type of order or ride, same type of pickup, delivery, et cetera?
Essentially, yes.
How many rides per hour you want in Eagle?
Yeah, well, Mr. Chair, again, that depends on the priorities of those local jurisdictions. And so we didn't go in similar to trying to establish expectations with Meridian when we launched the 30. We've been trying to manage those expectations with the city of Eagle as to what that on-demand service would be able to provide and used Canyon County as an example of that.
But in Eagle, you're not replacing a fixed route system.
In Eagle, we are not, no.
So this is a from scratch. Let's put this in this community.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Do you have any feeling, and I know you're substitute hitting here, do you have any feeling for what the Eagle financial commitment is relative to Canyon County's for their on demand? Is it, I don't know what the metric would be to compare them, but there's got to be a way to do it.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. The costs are absolutely different because the amount of service, the service area, the number of vehicles being provided in Eagle is different than in Canyon County.
Smaller?
Smaller, yes. So the burden that is on Eagle is up, that we're requesting in the city of Eagle is different than what we are requesting in Canyon County. There also what we were in. I mean this is getting into yeah. We were planning the Eagle on-demand service to be, we would say, braided or shared with the paratransit, but it's the like senior and other transportation offerings. So there were some efficiencies there as compared to the replacement of a fixed route service in Canyon County.
So the two are not readily comparable.
From a cost perspective, I would say they're not. From a operation, well, from a customer perspective, they should be pretty much the same. And the way we're describing it to the residents is essentially the same. It's the same software that's doing the routing. So all of that should feel very familiar.
And the anticipated start date for Eagle?
Still the spring, late spring, summer.
This spring.
Wait, yes. It's
I'm told.
still spring.
Had snow in my yard this morning, but
It will still be, should still be spring when it launches.
good. Thank you. Anything else on this topic? Thank you, sir. And the wonderful slide presentation as well.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Jason, again, for the outreach strategy
All right.
or strategic.
Stephen, I may holler at you again for this one. Sorry. Will you? Thank you. This is the first time I'm sitting in Kelly's old seat, so it's a lot going on, a lot to manage. Jason Rose, Communications Director. Yeah, I should say the reason I'm sitting here is that previously our Executive Director, Kelly Badesheim, kind of facilitated the meeting from the VRT standpoint. I'll be doing that moving forward. I'll have fewer answers, but we'll get there. But today what I'm presenting is the 2023 outreach strategy. It's on pages 13 through, I believe, 15 of your packet. And we're hoping to treat this as kind of a workshop. We have a little bit of time, but we won't take too much. But the strategy itself, this is a very kind of big picture overview in the packet. Talks about the phasing. And what we're doing right now is what we're calling phase one, which is like our initial feedback. This meeting is kind of the first kickoff sort of for that feedback session. We're going to do this in March and April. And then in May, we're hoping to really hit the ground running and do a lot more public outreach because we'll have more specifics on like potential service changes and things like that. I'll share a presentation that walks through kind of what we're doing, but that's sort of the framing of timelines. We'll go ahead and get going. So we're calling this initiative Better Bus, and I was kind of bummed to miss, well, I was bummed, not kind of bummed, to miss last month. It sounds like there was a really great conversation about the book Better Buses. And we've heard a lot of things in the community about, you know, do people want transit? Do they not want transit? We know that they do. When we say, you know, we want better buses, what we mean is everything to do with the bus, from routes, stops, signs, shorter trips, vehicles, kind of the whole system. But we're also trying to take it to the community in a way that's really digestible and easy to understand. So this is the stuff that we hear, that we want better buses. You all hear that all the time. And so with this initiative, with this campaign, we're hoping that that we can kind of lean on this group and help get the word out together. We're trying to get as much feedback, really meaningful, diverse feedback as possible. And I think this is going to be a good way to do it. By most people in the Valley, we've done surveys after surveys. We've heard the stories. We've heard stories from you all. You know, the last major outreach that we did around kind of the big vision was in 2018, and we had almost 2,000 people come back and say that they wanted better buses. So what we're doing right now is again, going out to the community, kind of reflecting on that vision. Are we going in the right direction overall, you know, in the big picture, in the grand scheme of the region? And then we'll kind of get into some specifics on route changes and whatnot. But right now we're really focusing on the big stuff. And so I'm just going to go through this presentation as if we were to give it at a town hall. This is the same thing we're going to be doing at some virtual town halls in the next few weeks. And it might provide a really great orientation, or somewhat of a great orientation for our new members. So double whammy here. So when you say we, who is we? That's Valley Regional Transit. We, the Public Transportation Authority for Ada and Canyon County. We've been around in one form or another since the 70s. And when you think about public transportation, you probably think about the bus. Fixed route service, we have 18 routes in Ada County. We have 4 inter-county routes and then 1 on-demand service in Canyon, with 1 to come this spring in Eagle. One thing we hear probably, I don't know, too often maybe, is that we see empty buses or there's not enough people riding, and that's not true. So we provided 900,000 rides last year. We're averaging around 80 to 90,000 trips per month over the last couple of years. But we also know we'd attract more riders if we could provide more service, and that's something that we're consistently looking to do. And we do love the bus. We kind of have this stance or provision of a fixed route first. That's really the focus. It's the most efficient way to get people around the region. But there are a lot of places that we don't serve, that we can't serve, or it doesn't make as much sense to serve with fixed route. So we also fill in the gaps with some of these other services and programs. So we have obviously our fixed route, but we have on-demand in Canyon County. We have a lot of great specialized services that span the entire region. That kind of gets into that Beyond ADA project that we're looking at. We have a lot of great support from CityGo and our help desk and travel training, and safe routes to school. And then we're continuing to explore Valley Bike, and Dave's going to give a presentation soon about that. But it's a good way to connect in a micro transit way from bus stop to bus stop for some of those areas that might not be well served by fixed route. And why do we do it? I mean, there's plenty of so many benefits to transit. I'll just go through a few of them. One thing we learned in 2018 when we did our vision study was that households can save $8,000 to $9,000 a year on transportation if they can reduce the cost of a car. In fact, as a region, we spend, and this is again 2018 dollars, $1.5 billion on transportation in general. So roads, cost of car ownership, kind of all the factors that go into that. But we only spend about 15 million on public transportation. So the question there is, we're already spending money on transportation infrastructure. How can we spend it more efficiently, provide people options? Because that's what we look at. That's why we do what we do, is really to provide people with freedom to get around the region, to have additional options other than just the single occupancy car. We also know that there's a significant reduction in emissions and congestion. We know that a full bus can offset about 19 cars and takes up a lot less roadway. And, we provide more access to location. People that ride the bus generally are more embedded in their community. You're seeing the community when you're on board the bus. You have access to that community, especially in areas that are more walkable, where we provide fixed route service in a walkable area. We are taking people to a place and then they interact with that place in a different way than they might if they're driving their car. So 2018, I mentioned that before, it was a big year for us. That's when we really started looking out further out into the future, and set a vision for better buses. And the map shown on the screen here is kind of a screen grab of that vision in 2018. And it's called Valley Connect 2.0. It's on our website if you want to read it in full. It's only 80 pages, which sounds like a lot. And so here's a map for you. A big part of this vision was that we didn't try to be cheap on what we were going to do. We weren't financially constrained. It was if we could get ourselves up to where we know we need to be, what would it cost? And we found out that we're about 4 times behind. We need about 4 times the amount of funding to provide something like this service. And what you see here is premium service in blue, frequent, secondary, and express. So those are all different types. Premium service, and Stephen, correct me on any of this, being service that's available 15 minutes on 15-minute frequencies during some portions of the day. And with the premium service having more substantial infrastructure, so better stations, lighting, amenities, and things like that. Frequent service is that which also offers frequencies some 15 minutes a day. And then we have our secondary service, which is more the local route. It might be 30 minutes a day frequencies or longer. And then our express routes, those are our park and rides that are usually running during commute times. We also identified the rail line there. It's something we've been hearing about for a long time. And knowing that there's a lot of conversation happening right now. And so it's something that we wanted to call out in that we support the movement towards some kind of a passenger commuter rail. On our side, it would likely take the form of providing a really good bus network around it to support it. But yeah, we wanted to make sure it was included in this vision. On the funding side, so I mentioned we learned we needed 4 times more bus service to level with peer cities. We don't get state funding. We don't have a dedicated source for local funding. We're able to use some federal funding, but the lack of state and local funds kind of restricts how much federal funding we can get. And so we're fairly limited on the funding that we have access to, which means we rely on contributions from cities, counties, institutions around the valley to run our service. Compared to peer cities, we are quite a bit lower on an annual funding per capita basis. And when we talk about provision of service, a lot of it comes right back to this funding portion. So we run the most service we can right now with the funding we have. We know we need 4 times more funding to get to where we want to be, but we also learned that 80% of the Valley said they're willing to pay $250 a year or more to support public transportation, and more than half would be willing to pay $500 a year or more. There's a demand out there. There's a desire to make it better. And so we're kind of on the back end in the process of trying to figure out ways to increase that funding. But in the meantime,
Jason,
yes.
just one quick point on that previous slide. Sometimes what I like to point out with a slide like this is transit can be more efficient than a car, sure. But if this is on an annual basis, $46 per person on an annual basis. So you might ask yourself, like, how far could you travel, even if you were being really, really efficient? Like, how far could you travel if in a year, if your travel budget was $50? Like, how much of all of the travel that you do in a year would you be able to accomplish with just $50? So it just, and I think I want to keep coming back to this kind of point because it really, different than almost any other public infrastructure service or infrastructure provider, what public transit is it's a service that actually makes that connection. So if you think about it in terms of your annual travel budget, then yeah, there aren't very many people that we're going to be able to get with only $50 per person per year. And anyways, that's might be a useful way to kind of think about, well, when somebody says nobody takes transit, or it's such a small percentage of the overall mode choice in the Valley, all of that is true. And you could ask, I mean, yes, we only spend $50 a person, and how much would you expect us to be able to do with a budget that's that size?
Yes, indeed. I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. So within that budget, so we still continue to work toward the vision. And that vision, some of the main points are we're a higher frequency network. That comes at a cost of coverage, typically. We'll talk about that here in a second. But also some regional connections, some upgrades to technology and our payment systems, which we've done. So since 2018, since we really started looking at that big picture, some of the things that we've done included, we've made some route changes that move us toward a high frequency network. We've launched a new bus route in Meridian. We're trying to establish some more regional connections and made changes like to the 45, offering some more local service on an inter-county basis. Launched VRT on demand in Canyon County. And we introduced real-time bus tracking and mobile smart card payment with UMO. We've also made plans for routes that we know people want in the future through the Transportation Development Plan. So that's where we take these vision ideas and then program them into kind of a work plan with the goal of trying to find the funding to provide for the service. And then we've also started work on a bus stop improvement project. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. But we've gotten some of the things going since 2018, and through this work, we're hoping to keep going in that direction. So this is what we call the Better Bus Initiative. And we're trying to make improvements across all of these categories with bus routes, bus stops, rides, and intercity rail. So what we're trying to do here, again, is really check in with the public as we move toward the vision, providing more buses more often. We at VRT and our board of directors have given us this direction, believe that a higher frequency system is more beneficial than a system that's more spread out. So what we're asking people is, what works now? What would you change? How can we improve services as they are? Do we still have support towards moving toward a high frequency system? And then in general, do we still have support for increasing funding for public transit? So on the Better Bus Routes side, we know that funding, again, is limited. So in order to make the most of our funding that we have, we are trying to move toward providing more buses more often. Again, that comes at a cost potentially of regional spread. But in doing so, we can make bus rides faster, transfers easier, and wait times shorter. And here's a graph that kind of highlights where we are. So in the 2000s, we were a little farther on the coverage side. So the coverage is on the left, the frequency is on the right. And this is kind of a generalization. In transit networks, it's not that the entire network is coverage or frequency based. We have some routes that are more coverage based and some routes that are more frequency based, but this is more conceptual as we move toward a higher frequency network. So some of the trade-offs here, if we have fewer buses on routes with fewer trips available per hour on the coverage side, we move toward a frequency side where we can kind of shift those buses onto existing routes and offer more trips per hour. If we're more spread out, then we have more bus routes and stops in more places, obviously, but the service is going to be lower. Whereas if we move toward the frequency, we might have fewer bus stops and fewer bus routes across the region. But that also means we have resources to provide more shelters, benches, and different amenities like that. Wait times and transfer times are huge. Frequency is such a big impact on an everyday bus ride from, if you're waiting for 30 minutes versus 15 minutes, or if your transfer takes an hour or versus 15 minutes. That's a tremendous change to somebody's experience. And then it's the same for the planning aspect of it. In a coverage-based system where there's less frequency, passengers have to really plan around the bus schedule. In a very frequent system, the bus is there when you need it. And then from a funding standpoint, if we have more people on board, we're operating more efficiently, more of the funding is going to come from the fare box. And so that's a more economical trade-off. And so looking at it a bit differently, if a bus comes once an hour, that's a long time to wait. But if we can add one additional bus and offer service every 30 minutes, the wait time is much, much less, especially if there's a transfer involved. And then if you add an additional bus for every 15 minutes, we're really operating on a high frequency basis. Again, especially if we're like in the core of Boise, where we have quite a few routes that offer frequent service. You can go from route to route and get where you need to go much faster, especially if we're talking about some of our major destinations like Main Street Station or Town Square. Really good connection points to quite a few different routes. And the wonderful metaphor that Stephen and I have been talking about is like, imagine if you had a magic car and the magic car could only start on the hour every hour. And if you didn't start it on the hour, you'd have to wait for another hour. It wouldn't be a very magic car. It's a very restrictive car. But if this car instead was available to start every 15 minutes or even faster than that, your access is much, much greater. And that's the kind of experience people have in the region. And these are the kind of things that we're trying to plan for. Next to that, we have better bus rides. And within this category, we're including anything that can improve a ride overall. We have free Wi-Fi on the buses right now. We have trip planning on our website and apps. We have fare payment with our mobile app and smart card through UMO and CityGo. We're looking at adding more electric buses. So these are much more quiet and they're more sustainable. And we're also in the process of getting onboard digital screens for the buses. Our buses right now have audio announcements, which are great for anybody that needs to know when they get off. So as the bus approaches a major intersection, it'll announce and have on the screen, on a small scrolling screen, upcoming arrivals. But these digital screens can have like a route ladder that shows upcoming stops, We can share news, we can share agency news, and do a lot of communication there. And so that's a potential huge improvement. We're going to try to pilot that with about 8 buses, hopefully still this year, to add that onboard experience and make that a little bit better. On the bus stop side, we are working on a project called Better Bus Stops. It's coming out of the bus stop typology study that has been presented to this council a few times through Stephen and this group. It's essentially a menu of options for amenities at bus stops, including benches, shelters, trash receptacles, improved lighting, real-time bus arrival information at the stops. We're in the process of identifying which stops get which amenities. Due to funding, everything won't go at every stop. We're not going to have every stop fully loaded with every amenity out there, but we're working on identifying what goes where. And again, depending on where the routes are, if we can kind of consolidate some of that service, we can provide more amenities to more places. The picture here shows a bus station downtown. It's one of the upgraded stations. We have a bike lane that runs behind it. There's a large shelter with good lighting. There's a fence going across the back of it. We have a bench and a trash can. There's a warning strip on a raised curb, and the raised curb is really important because it makes boarding easier. On board or from that curb onto the bus is a lot easier. And so this is far more of a kind of a destination than some other stops in the system. On the right, there's an example of the current bus stop sign. And the sign itself, it's a bit old. It tells you the name of the route. It's not super visible, and there's not a ton of information at the stop. I've heard from a lot of riders that go up to a bus stop and they don't quite know what to do, and this information doesn't give them enough to really go on. So what we're looking at doing is making these updates. So we have on the left a sign blade, which shows which routes serve the stop. We're shifting a bit from having each bus route have its own color to a color kind of per type of service. So a frequent route might run, 15 minutes there more often all day. And what we hope to do is educate people to know that's what these indicators mean. So frequent, local, and peak service. But we're also looking at adding supplemental information. That's kind of in the upper right here, which shows destinations, how to book a ride, passenger information. So we're hoping to get as much information for the passenger so they can make an informed decision when they go up to a bus stop. And then we're also looking at that real-time bus arrival information, kind of on the lower right. And that's a critical thing, knowing when your bus is going to get there. I know as a bus rider, I ride the 6, and if I'm at Main Street Station and I have the arrival board, and I can see when my bus is versus when I don't. The experience is far different, and the reliability is a huge thing here. People knowing when their bus is going to be there contributes to the overall experience. So those are things that we're working on. Yes, please.
Be doing for the non-English speaking populations?
Great question. Do you want to talk about that on the signage side?
Well, so I guess there's a couple of things. We're trying to simplify. If you went back to the previous slide, we're trying to simplify the information on the sign. At some point, there's a translation that needs to happen, right? But we're trying to simplify the information on the sign to make it easier to see, so that if they're looking at you go back a slide, Jason. If you're looking at the bus stop sign, we're trying to communicate it simply with a number. Say, okay, you want route X, and then by the number or by the color of the route, that tells you something about when the service is there. So if somebody says, oh, I need to take route 40 and it's in the middle of the day, and they look at that and they're like, oh, it's a peak only route. Hopefully that makes it easier for people to understand when they would expect what kind of service. So that's one thing, is we did do an effort to try and simplify the information and get to it without as much text, but just sort of visually and be able, but clearly somebody's going to need to communicate all of that about what those signs mean, but did try and do it that way. We also have on the supplemental, so I would just point out that the supplemental information is intended to be at all stops. And so, and It again tries to be as short on verbiage as possible, but it is still, I mean, it's written in English, but their destinations are the English. I mean, they're their locations, and the numbers are for time and when the service is available. There's also a QR code on the supplemental, which will take them to a digital format where we can have links to other translation services. And then of course there's the phone number that somebody could call, and we do have the translation services available there. So those are the couple of ways that we're looking at addressing that.
And I think after that, the signage is one thing, but I think the steps we can take after to work with community organizations and finding where the need is and provide navigation and travel training. I think that's where we're going to lean on for kind of actions we can take to get translated services and translated training out. So that's probably an area that we'll kind of lean on this group as well to explore opportunities for that. And from a timeline perspective, we're going to start putting some signage up on existing stops this spring with the intention on kind of changing things over throughout the summer, throughout the fall, and then into over the next couple of years, depending on what the nature of the change to the bus stop is. So along with that, we would be able to go out and work with community groups and yeah. But no, I'm glad you asked. That's a great question. Final portion, we continue to work with partners. The cities in the region are leading a lot of this work, working with other cities, Salt Lake City and Portland, for instance. But our CEO, Elaine, is highly involved as well. And so, from what it's looking like, the idea is that there might be an opportunity for a local connection between Caldwell and Boise, again, supported by great bus service. So as we plan for the vision, that's something we're always keeping in mind is as that thing comes on board or online, what can we do from a service standpoint to facilitate travel to and from? And that is the end of the slideshow. Again, this is intended to be kind of the version of our virtual town hall. So what we'll do is throughout the PowerPoint is kind of ask people their feedback on, do you support better bus stops? Do you support our work on bus routes and moving toward that more frequent service? Do you support the things we're doing to make the bus ride better? And then would you support some kind of a rail contribution? And so it's not only do they support the projects, but would you support your city contributing more funding to make these things better? Because it's a big piece of feedback we need and a big piece of feedback that the cities themselves need when they decide their budgets. So what I'll be doing this week is I'll be sending out some follow-up information on dates for virtual town halls. We'll have some open houses, and we're also going to have a partner toolkit. And so what we are going to ask of you all is to help us spread the word. We'll have our onboard or our online engagement platform, Engage VRT, active. So we're asking for a lot of different points of input, whether it's in person or online. So we'll send that information out with some tools to help kind of spread the word, and we'd appreciate any support on that. With that, I would be happy to stand for questions.
Questions on this topic for Jason?
I just had a question with, kind of moving to digital screens on the bus. Have you thought about who updates them and how they update them in terms of like the things beyond the route? Because I know, thank you. Sometimes that can be a challenge when it's like, all right, we're moving to this looking forward digital screen, and then no one's exactly sure who's responsible for updating it or how they actually do that.
Great question. So I've had some experience in that in the past at other transit agencies, and the software that they use is pretty intuitive, at least on the stuff that I've seen. So we're gonna do a lot of that work in house, but some of our partnerships have, the vendor, for instance, will also facilitate some of that work. Once we set the screen format, like the real-time arrival information, that's an auto feed, so it'll automatically populate that. If we have like a news banner or a weather banner, a lot of that auto populates as well. And so what we're looking at is having a section of the screen that we can just run kind of a rotation of images or videos on. And the initial plan is that we're going to test it out just with rider information from VRT or partners. You know, we're more than happy to share. If you all have an event or something like that, we can kind of rotate those images through. At that point, it's just a matter of kind of plugging and playing the imagery. Eventually, we hope to potentially move into some advertising to generate some more revenue, like some geo-targeted stuff. So that's when we'll talk about, do we need assistance from, you know, our vendor to do some of that work. But so it's kind of a two-part thing. It's like, can we generate more revenue as we go throughout the route and advertise these destinations? But also, how can we better inform our passengers on what's going on? So yeah, I think we have a pretty good plan in place. We still have some work to do on like procuring the actual hardware and software and things like that. But knowing that there probably will be bumps in the road. It sounds like you may have experienced that before.
I mean, just kind of a few jobs I've had recently where it's like, all right, we're finally got this money and we're going to have this great screen in the front. And then maybe it'll sit there for quite a while because no one's exactly sure whose responsibility is or how you actually do that. Or
Totally.
can I just put whatever I want on here, you know, or what's the process to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to filter everything through kind of the communications team. And anytime we put any content out, whether it's on social media or the website or whatever, we put together like an editorial calendar. And so that'll be kind of the same process for this.
Okay, thanks.
And we do have a policy that guides who is in charge of that information and how it's presented. So we have to follow that policy approved by the board.
Bill.
So you mentioned open houses, right, Jason? Have you thought about going to the libraries? I work at Boise Main Library, and we actually have a rounder that has all the bus routes on there, and we have a lot of riders at Boise Main, and there would be a place to set a table. You wouldn't be able to do a presentation there, but to have a table sitting there to have people give feedback. I know that Hillcrest Library is served by a couple different routes. There's a lot of riders that go to Hillcrest. There's a bound bus. I'm not too sure about Colonusic, but that's a great place to engage with people who ride the bus. So I'm not too sure if that's something that you've considered.
There we go. Kept it pretty brief in the memo, but I noted some open houses and pop-up tables at libraries specifically. It's kind of where we're looking at. So Main Street Station's a big one. We're going to try libraries a lot in this round. And then getting into May, one thing that's going to be important in addition to the pop-ups at places like libraries, is going to be some onboard work with our existing riders, and then trying to get out to neighborhood associations and kind of meetings that are actively occurring. But we should talk more about the library space.
That's
Because-
fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Want to use it.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to add the English Language Center would be a good place to reach refugees. So if you're interested in that, I can arrange it.
Yes, absolutely. See, this is why we do this. I love it. English Language Center, absolutely.
Someone else? Anyone else?
I guess just on that, so your goal would be to reach primarily existing riders or reaching out to people who are maybe on the fence?
Both. Yep. Yeah. In April, again, the April one is kind of I don't want to say a soft intro to May, but April is going to help inform, help get us information to take to the cities as we kind of share with them what our intentions are and where we hope to go. Once we have more clear information from some of the cities on what they're willing to fund, we can then develop full service concepts. And that's when we'll go out, I think, in more detail and give specifics. Overall, though, yes, we're trying to get to existing riders and potential riders, new riders. Yeah.
Anyone else? Thank you, sir. You did a great job of backing you up there.
Indeed. Team effort.
Okay, next item is an update on e-bike. Dave Frosch.
Well, good morning. I really don't have a whole lot to tell you. There is a memo in your packet, but here are the broad strokes of what's going on. The city of Boise went to request for proposal on the 7th of December. And what they're trying to do is find a single provider for micro mobility in Boise. So that would be a company that can provide both scooters and perhaps e-bikes. And they identified, they had 4 proposers, including the 3 companies that currently operate in the city. And in February, they identified Lime as their preferred vendor. And we don't know the status of when a final contract will be in the offing. So what we are doing in the interim is we are developing a business plan, and we are looking at expanding e-bike service across our region. So we've had conversations with the city of Caldwell, Nampa, and Meridian, and also Garden City. And we are also looking at the possibility of leveraging some federal funding to lower the price of sponsorship required to support the service. Those plans are still underway. I've been working very closely with Kelly Badesheim in developing this new business plan and the budgets associated with it. So that's really where we stand right now.
Okay, questions for Dave?
I just have a question. I can't remember. Did you say, based on this request for proposal, that all of the other vendors will no longer be allowed to operate in the city?
That is correct. And I believe that the contract for all 3 of the vendors currently operating in the city of Boise ends at the end of this month. And so I guess the single operator, Lime, would start their service on April 1st. And that's no joke.
Anyone else? Jeremy?
Hey, Mr. Chair. Dave, thanks for that update. I'm, I guess, happy to hear that there'll be one e-scooter provider. E-scooters in my world are one characteristic of a dystopian future. And I continue to see these things peppered across the public right of way on curb ramps and sidewalks, and they're everywhere. And they're not being picked up. They're not being, riders are not responsible with them. I don't know what happens when you get on an e-scooter versus getting on a bike. People who get on a bike seem to be responsible adults. And then people, when they get on an e-scooter, seem to regress back to being a 12-year-old who can't pick up their toys. And it's really, really annoying. My blood pressure when I'm driving around Boise just is constantly high, and I'm constantly curbing my desire to just ram my vehicle into these e-scooters. All that being said, since you're having a single provider and a contract, I would love to encourage you to build in as big of a hammer as you can possibly build to beat these companies into submission, because they are going to do as little as possible, which is at this point nothing, to curb the constant blocking of the public right of way. I don't know what more I can say about this. I've been beating this dead horse now, and a horse would be an improvement. I'd prefer to wheel through horse manure than I would to have to see these scooters all over the place. But beating this dead horse, we have got to get a handle both on e-scooter non-compliance. They need to feel the pain through serious fines. And I think it goes hand in hand with these rideshare companies like Lyft and Uber, who suck the oxygen out of the room for any kind of accessible transportation providers that we used to have through cab companies that are vaporizing. So we have got to do a better job creating contracts that beat these companies into submission to do what they have a responsibility to do, and that they will not do on their own. They will not do it on their own. They are not legally charged with keeping the sidewalks clear. They are legally charged with making money for their shareholders. That's what they exist for. Not even existing for microtransportation. They exist to make money. And if that's the hammer, if that's the nail, then I think we all know what the hammer is. So please do whatever you can do to put access and keeping public right away free and clear of these things at the front of the conversation. And then I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you for those comments, Jeremy, and I feel your pain. I think that we have to look at the economics of the micromobility industry to understand what's going on here. The scooters make money for these companies, and at the current levels, they aren't generating enough rides with the 250 devices each company is allowed to have. So the theory behind what the city is doing is that by choosing a single provider, they will have enough scooters that they can make enough money to subsidize a limited number of e-bikes. We don't know what number that is going to be. But the e-bikes are going to operate on the same platform as the scooters, which means that they aren't going to be returned to docks like our system. They too can be left just anywhere on the sidewalk. And what I suspect is going to happen is that this single company is going to have a lot more scooters than what we see already. I'll give an example. The city of Spokane has a single provider in the form of Lime, and that company is allowed 1,500 scooters. And in exchange, they have brought in 100 e-bikes. So that would be a dramatic increase over what we currently have in Boise with 750 scooters. It remains to be seen, and it is up to the city to enforce this. We still have plans to try and deploy bikes in Boise. We don't think that the city can tell us not to deploy bikes because we would be helping them to achieve their goals as far as getting people out of their single occupancy vehicles. But I totally agree with you that the enforcement of parking those devices has been lax. And I don't know under the proposed contract how they're going to improve that. I think we'll just have to wait and see.
Dave, can you reach out to the city and express those concerns and ask what their proposed contract looks like in that regard?
Yeah, we would love to see the contract. And I presume that this contract will come before city council sooner or later. But yeah, I'll reach out, see what I can find out.
And you don't believe that they're going to a single provider will preclude VRT?
We don't, because the city wants to get people out of their cars. And if we have a method of providing additional bikes and providing alternative transportation, I really don't see how they could say no.
Okay. Any other questions for Dave? One point I would like to make was if anyone's got a closer relationship with Jeremy than I do, I wish you would work with him to get him to express his opinion a little more specifically. These generalities are a little hard to follow sometimes.
Mr. Chair, I'm working on it. I will seek
Okay.
therapy.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. Is anyone prepared to cover the Eagle Senior Center service for Leslie?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will do that.
Hunt.
So again, in your packet, there's a brief memo about the Eagle Senior Center service. And I will just speak to that really quickly and then be here for any questions. So VRT staff met with the board of Eagle Senior Center last week, and we're working together to try and start accommodating evening and weekend trips that ended in January when VRT began operating the service. And the board requested, that is the VRT board, requested that VRT staff present to their members in April information on expectations on how to request trips Now the VRT is operating service. The board stated that some of their members are unclear of the scheduling process and have not been requesting trips. So that's an update to the memo that's in your packet, but yeah, generally, I think I'll stop there for any questions.
So there's no thought of it going back to a senior center operated bus system. It'll be VRT operated.
I believe that's the direction, yes.
Questions for Stephen on the Eagle Senior Center service? Stephen, you earlier, when you were talking about the Eagle on Demand, you made some reference to overlap with the senior center service.
And Mr. Chair, the original concept was that this was before we had terminated the agreement with the senior center services, is that those operators and vehicles would be providing the service. So that's since changed, and it would be VRT operating and providing those services. And I guess the point that I would make is that the direction that we're looking at doing is making sure that we can accommodate the types of trips that the seniors were experiencing before when it was operated under the senior center, and finding a way to be able to accommodate those trips.
But VRT is currently operating the daytime trips.
That is correct.
Okay. Just working on
evening and weekend trips.
And they also provide the evening trips, which I understand sometimes are created fairly close to when they're going to run. That is a challenge for providing buses and drivers. Okay.
That's my understanding, Mr. Chair.
As they say in the courtroom shows, he's nodding in the affirmative. Okay. No one else on that topic, then we will go to my usual request for you to bring us topics. We would do love when anyone gets a hold of Paula, myself, Mary Beth, and says, I wonder about, or I've thought about, or have you thought about, or what about? And we'd love to research it and see if it's possible to get some answers to your questions or information on things that nobody's even thought of yet. So keep that in mind. There are additional department and staff reports in your packet that are worth your time to read. If you haven't had an opportunity to do so, I would invite you to get those done in the next several days. While you'll find where you threw the packet. I don't have anything else, Mary Beth.
I have something to say.
Okay. Anyone else for the good of the order?
I
Yes, ma'am.
do have, I had some follow-up from team members at Southwest District Health on ridership restrictions. Those would not have been made locally. They would have been recommendations from our local health districts. Because you're federally funded, you might have had restrictions for the federal restrictions, but those have been downgraded to just masking as a recommendation, at least in my experience in some of the national parks. So I don't think you have a restriction of numbers or anything like that at this point.
Thank you. Anything else?
So I do have a comment about something that was in the staff reports, and that was about CityGo doing the tire side chats. I attended the last 2 tire side chats, and they were very well attended. Each time the subject changes, if you all have an opportunity to attend. And the thing that I have to report back about it is that I think it generated a lot of conversations within the community. It was very engaging. Stephen and Jason were involved in the second one that I had attended, urban planning and community engagement. But after that happened in the weeks following, I ran into other people who had attended, and we had some really good conversations about it. And I've even noticed a little bit more engagement from some of the people who participated in doing some more advocacy work for alternative modes of transportation. So just kudos to the team and CityGo. I don't know if Haley's on the call, but she did a great job moderating the one that was most recent. So, I mean, I've heard lots of really great feedback about those tire side chats. So thank you.
Anything else? Stephen, one thought I just had by something one of you said earlier about people indicating in the valley that they would be willing to pay up to $250 per year for public transit. That to me is a very good talking point to the elected officials when you're attempting to get the city of East Undershirt to give you more money. Tell them that, you know, here's the data that shows that people are willing. And if they would, you know, elected officials would go ahead and up their budget for that, and then give the public a chance at the public hearings on the budgets to say, no, 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 we don't want to spend that much. That'd be okay. But at least to try to tell the elected officials that our data shows they're willing to spend more than what we're doing. Okay. With that said, Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair,
Jeremy,
I wanted to thank the staff and Jason for staffing this meeting. I know it's the first meeting since Kelly retired, and you guys did a great job, and appreciate the packet and the facilitation and the reports.
All right, thank you, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Okay, motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Jeremy, second, maybe Mary Beth. I heard her. No discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody want to stay? Thank you all. Thanks to the staff.